Ibrahim Traoré was a name that had quickly become famous across Africa. Just a few years ago, hardly anyone outside of Burkina Faso knew who he was. He was a young soldier, smart, brave, and deeply respected by his fellow soldiers. People admired him because he spoke up for the poor, for the farmers, and for those who felt forgotten by the powerful leaders in their countries. Traoré believed Africa should stand on its own, without always depending on foreign countries for help. As time passed, his powerful speeches about independence and African pride won him a loyal following. Young people especially saw him as a symbol of hope, a man who was not afraid to challenge the big powers. Traoré would often speak at public gatherings, where he reminded people of their history, their rich land, and the importance of protecting their resources. His words inspired crowds to chant his name, wave flags, and believe in a brighter future for their country. It wasn't long before Ibrahim Traoré stepped into politics. In a surprising turn of events, he became the transitional president of Burkina Faso. Many celebrated his rise to power. Across West Africa, his face appeared on posters, murals, and social media posts. He was a hero to many, someone who promised to chase away foreign companies taking advantage of Africa's resources and rebuild his nation with honesty and courage. But as with many stories of sudden power, there were secrets hidden in the shadows. What the public did not know was that while Traoré was making strong speeches about fighting against foreign influence, he was also holding quiet meetings behind closed doors. Powerful businessmen and officials from Europe visited his office late at night. These meetings were not recorded and no reporters were allowed to ask questions. Documents were signed, promises were made, and deals were struck, all away from the eyes of the people. Some journalists in Zambia, a country far to the south of Burkina Faso, began to grow suspicious. Zambia, like many African countries, was rich in minerals like cobalt, copper, and lithium. These were valuable resources, especially for modern technology like smartphones, electric cars, and computers. But for years, the people of Zambia saw little benefit from these natural treasures. Despite having such wealth underground, many communities still struggled with poor roads, limited schools, and hospitals without enough medicine. One newspaper, in Lusaka, called the Lusaka Sentinel, decided to investigate. The team of reporters, led by a determined editor named Mavis Fury, started collecting information. They noticed that large shipments of minerals, which were supposed to go through proper government channels in Zambia, were somehow ending up listed as exports from Burkina Faso. The amounts didn't make sense and the paperwork was suspicious. They dug deeper, asking questions that no one else dared to ask. A source within the mining industry secretly passed them a set of papers marked confidential. These documents showed clear evidence that European companies, with the silent agreement of officials from both Burkina Faso and Zambia, had been rerouting valuable mineral exports. The plan was simple but dishonest. Minerals would leave Zambian mines, travel through Burkina Faso, and then get shipped to Europe. This allowed the companies to pay lower fees and avoid taxes meant for the Zambian government. The most shocking part of the documents was the signature at the bottom. It belonged to none other than Ibrahim Traoré himself. The man who publicly spoke about protecting Africa's wealth was, in private, signing deals that took resources away from neighboring countries without fair payment. The code name for this entire operation was Project Equinox. For Mavis and her team, it was both a thrilling and terrifying discovery. They knew that revealing this information could bring serious danger. Many journalists in Africa had faced threats, and some had disappeared after exposing powerful leaders. But the team at the Lusaka Sentinel believed the truth was too important to hide. They decided to move carefully. First, they verified the authenticity of the documents. They cross-checked signatures, company records, and shipping data. Then they reached out to contacts in Europe who confirmed the involvement of certain business figures in London and Brussels. It became clear that this wasn't just a local problem. It was an international scandal. As the evidence piled up, Mavis contacted a trusted friend at an international news agency. Together they planned how to release the story safely. The risk was enormous, but they believed that the people of Zambia, and indeed all of Africa, deserved to know what was happening with their resources. At the same time, back in Burkina Faso, Traoré continued his public appearances. He gave passionate speeches about unity and African strength. Crowds still cheered for him, and many still believed in his words. But behind the scenes, whispers began to spread. Some people noticed his close relationship with certain foreign visitors. Others wondered why promised reforms in Burkina Faso were taking so long. Little did they know that a storm was about to break, one that would link Traoré's name to one of the biggest financial scandals in Africa's history. As Mavis and her team prepared to publish their report, they felt a mixture of fear and hope. They knew the story would cause waves not just in Zambia and Burkina Faso, but all over the world. The documents they held in their hands would prove that powerful leaders and foreign businesses had secretly been working together to take billions in minerals from the very people they claimed to serve. And so, the stage was set for a major revelation, one that would shake governments, anger the public, and forever change the way Africa viewed its leaders and its partnerships with the outside world. The sun rose over Lusaka, and the city was waking up like any other ordinary morning. But inside the small office of the Lusaka Sentinel, things were far from normal. Mavis Fury and her team of reporters had barely slept the night before. They were busy going through piles of papers, emails, and shipping records, all pointing to something far bigger than anyone had imagined. Their hands trembled as they held the documents. These papers weren't just numbers and signatures. They told a story of minerals leaving Zambia in secret, passing through Burkina Faso, and then shipped off to Europe. The biggest shock was that these shipments had been approved by leaders who were supposed to protect the wealth of their countries. Among the papers were letters written by European business agents. These letters mentioned large payments made to unknown bank accounts and thanked certain African leaders for their cooperation. One of those names was Ibrahim Traoré. The man so many people admired for his brave speeches was mentioned again and again. It was clear he wasn't just aware of the deals. He was helping them happen. The whistleblower who had passed them the documents used a fake name, calling himself Nchimunya, a common Zambian name that means one who keeps secrets. Nchimunya had promised there was more to come. He sent another batch of digital files the next evening. These files included audio recordings of meetings held between European businessmen and African officials. In the background of one recording, someone could clearly be heard mentioning Project Equinox. The reporters were stunned. They realized the true size of the operation. It wasn't just a few dishonest deals. It was a carefully planned project that had been running for years. It involved leaders in Africa, powerful businessmen in Europe, and a lot of money changing hands in secret. According to the numbers they found, Zambia alone had lost more than $4.7 billion in stolen resources. Mavis knew they had enough proof to tell the world. But before going public, she needed to be sure that everything was verified. She and her team carefully checked the dates, names, and shipping records. They compared the documents with public government reports. The differences were shocking. Minerals that had supposedly been exported from Zambia didn't appear in Zambia's official records, but they did show up in Europe, labeled as coming from Burkina Faso. They reached out to a trusted contact in Brussels, a European journalist named Clara Voss. Clara was experienced in uncovering corporate crimes and had worked on several major investigations. When she saw the documents, she immediately knew they were real. She confirmed that the business agents mentioned were known in European business circles and had been involved in similar cases before. Mavis and Clara decided to work together. They knew this story was too big for just one country. It affected not just Zambia, but the entire African continent and its relationship with Europe. Together, they planned to release the story at the same time in both Africa and Europe, making sure it would get international attention. As the final report was being prepared, word of the investigation quietly spread among a few government officials in Zambia. Some were angry and wanted to stop the story, while others were grateful that someone was finally exposing the truth. Even inside the government, not everyone had known about Project Equinox. The news also began to reach ordinary people in Lusaka. Though the full report hadn't yet been published, rumors flew around like wildfire. Market vendors, taxi drivers, and university students whispered about secret deals and stolen resources. People were shocked to hear that their valuable minerals might have been taken without fair payment, while schools lacked books and clinics ran out of medicine. Across the border in Burkina Faso, a few brave reporters also picked up the whispers. They too began asking quiet questions about Traoré's late-night meetings with foreign businessmen. Some in the president's office started to worry. They didn't know how much evidence the Lusaka Sentinel had, or when it might be made public. Meanwhile, European officials who had been part of the secret deals began to panic. Some tried to delete emails and destroy documents. Others called their contacts in Africa, warning them to stay quiet. But it was too late. The truth was no longer a secret kept by a few people. It was now in the hands of determined journalists ready to tell the world. In the middle of all this, President Ibrahim Traoré continued to give public speeches. He spoke of African unity, independence, and fairness. He promised to protect Burkina Faso's resources from outsiders. The people cheered, waving flags and singing songs about freedom. But behind the smiling faces, doubts were beginning to grow. Whispers of Project Equinox reached even the crowded markets and quiet villages. Traoré's closest advisors tried to calm him, saying the rumors would pass. But deep down, he knew the walls were closing in. He had built his image as a hero of Africa, yet now the truth threatened to shatter that image. Back in Lusaka, Mavis stood by the window of her office watching the city lights flicker in the evening. She felt the weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't just another news story. It was a moment that could change how people viewed their leaders and how nations dealt with each other. The final decision came late at night. Mavis gathered her team and said, "We publish tomorrow." Everyone in the room nodded. The report was titled, "Traoré Exposed: The Hidden Billions of Project Equinox." It was carefully written in clear, simple language so every Zambian, young and old, could understand it. As the journalists saved the final draft, they knew life would not be the same after sunrise. The story would spark anger, demand answers, and perhaps for the first time in a long time, give ordinary people the power to hold the powerful accountable. And so, with hearts pounding and eyes wide open, they prepared to share the truth with the world. The morning that followed was like no other in Lusaka. People rushed to buy the latest issue of the Lusaka Sentinel, their eyes eager to see what had been causing so many whispers. Radios began reading out headlines and social media filled with the shocking news. The bold letters on the front page said it all. Traoré exposed: the hidden billions of Project Equinox. Across the country, people stopped what they were doing to listen. At bus stops, in marketplaces, and on university campuses, crowds gathered around phones and radios. Mothers called their children over to hear the story, while old men shook their heads in disbelief. The report explained in clear words how Zambia's valuable minerals had been taken in secret deals, how they were shipped through Burkina Faso, and how important people in Europe and Africa had been involved. The most painful part for many Zambians was realizing how much money their country had lost. The report explained that over $4.7 billion worth of minerals had quietly left their land over several years, while ordinary people still struggled with poor roads, overcrowded hospitals, and schools without enough teachers. News of the scandal spread fast. Civil society groups, students, farmers, and workers quickly organized small protests in different parts of the country. People carried signs that said, "Where is our money?" and "Stop stealing from Zambia." Though the protests started small, the anger in people's hearts was growing like a storm about to break. In the capital, President Hakainde Hichilema called an emergency meeting at State House. Ministers, advisors, and security officials filled the room. The president looked serious as he placed a copy of the Lusaka Sentinel on the table. "This is a betrayal to our people," he said quietly, "and it cannot be ignored." The ministers agreed. Even those who usually avoided difficult decisions understood that this scandal was too big to be swept under the rug. The people were angry, and the government had to respond before the situation worsened. The president ordered a full investigation into the missing mineral wealth and the involvement of foreign companies. He also announced that Zambia would officially demand compensation from the countries whose businesses had taken part in the scheme. The government quickly sent letters to the European Union and the United Kingdom, asking for urgent meetings to discuss the matter. This decision was met with loud cheers from protesters gathered outside Parliament. For the first time, ordinary citizens felt their voices were being heard. Social media lit up with messages of support, and people shared hopeful words with one another. In nearby countries, the news caused a stir as well. In Malawi, Zimbabwe, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, people started asking whether the same thing had happened to them. Citizens demanded that their leaders check mining deals and trade records. The people's courage in Zambia gave others the strength to speak up. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, the situation grew tense. President Ibrahim Traoré's office was flooded with calls from journalists asking for his side of the story. For the Ichai, first time since he rose to power, his name was being linked to a scandal bigger than anything his country had ever seen. Traoré appeared on national television later that evening. Dressed in his usual military uniform, he spoke firmly, saying, "The accusations were lies meant to damage Africa's unity." He claimed foreign enemies were trying to divide African leaders and make them fight among themselves. His words were strong, but many viewers noticed something different in his face. The usual confidence was missing. Even as Traoré tried to calm the situation, more information continued to come out. A group of students in Burkina Faso released a statement saying they wanted answers from their own leader. They respected his past promises but could not remain silent if he had betrayed the trust of Africans. Back in Europe, leaders of the EU and the UK found themselves in a difficult position. Journalists in London and Brussels asked tough questions about the companies named in Project Equinox. Officials tried to deny any involvement at first, but as evidence from the Lusaka Sentinel and European reporters piled up, silence became impossible. The European Union quickly announced that they would send a team to Lusaka for talks. The United Kingdom followed, promising to investigate the companies under its laws. Though these promises sounded polite, most people in Zambia felt they were just an attempt to calm the storm. As evening fell in Lusaka, people gathered in parks, streets, and markets, discussing what might happen next. Many said they wanted to see those involved held responsible. Some hoped that if justice was done, the stolen billions might finally be used to fix roads, build hospitals, and open new schools. President Hichilema appeared on national television again, this time speaking directly to the nation. He promised that Zambia would stand firm and would not back down until justice was served. The people cheered. For the first time in a long while, citizens felt their leader was truly on their side. Throughout the night, candles were lit in front of Parliament and in town squares. Groups sang old freedom songs, reminding one another of the courage their ancestors showed in fighting for independence. Now, it seemed, a new kind of struggle was beginning, one for fairness, honesty, and control over their country's wealth. The next day, newspapers in other African countries carried the story on their front pages. Headlines read, "Zambia demands billions from EU and UK, and Africa's wealth must stay in Africa." The world was watching, and the people of Zambia knew they were making history. What had started as a small investigation by a handful of brave reporters had grown into a national movement. And though many challenges still lay ahead, the people were ready to face them together, stronger and more determined than ever before. Days turned into weeks, but the story of Project Equinox refused to fade. Every morning, Zambians woke up to new updates in the newspapers, on the radio, and on social media. People talked about it in buses, offices, schools, and market stalls. The anger was still strong, but now it was mixed with hope. For the first time, ordinary people felt that their voices had power. In Lusaka, a special committee was formed to investigate the scandal. It included government officials, respected lawyers, economists, and even leaders from civil society groups. The president made sure this committee had full authority to demand documents, question ministers, and call witnesses. The nation's attention was fixed on them. At the same time, the European Union and the United Kingdom sent teams to Zambia for emergency talks. When the planes carrying the foreign delegates landed at Kenneth Kaunda International Airport, reporters rushed to take pictures. These visitors were met with signs from peaceful protesters reading, "Africa's wealth is not for sale, and we want our billions back." Inside the conference halls, the talks were tense. Zambian officials presented clear evidence of the missing minerals, the fake paperwork, and the secret deals that had allowed foreign companies to take resources without paying proper taxes. The visiting delegates looked uncomfortable as the documents were laid out in front of them. "What you see here," said one of the Zambian negotiators, "is the hard truth. Our country has lost billions while our children sit in classrooms, without desks, and our hospitals run out of medicine." The European and British delegates promised to review the evidence and discuss possible compensation, but many Zambians feared these were just polite words meant to calm the storm without real action. The people wanted more than promises; they wanted results. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, pressure on President Ibrahim Traoré increased. His government tried to dismiss the reports as lies made up by enemies, but the people were no longer convinced. Students marched in the streets of Ouagadougou, carrying posters that read, "We want the truth," and "Africa deserves better." Some of Traoré's closest allies began to distance themselves from him. Ministers avoided appearing beside him at public events. Rumors spread that even within his military leadership, there were disagreements about how to handle the crisis. Traoré, once seen as the symbol of African pride, was now being questioned by the very people who had once cheered for him. Back in Lusaka, Mavis Fury and her team at the Lusaka Sentinel became national heroes. People sent them letters of thanks, and school children sang songs about courage in their honor. Other journalists across Africa felt encouraged by their bravery. New investigations began in neighboring countries, and more stories of dishonest deals started to surface. As the investigation continued, the Zambian Special Committee discovered something even more surprising. The stolen minerals were not only shipped through Burkina Faso, but had also passed through other countries in secret. It turned out that the network of illegal deals was bigger than anyone first thought. Several top business figures in Europe, and a few officials in other African governments were quietly involved too. This information gave Zambia more power in the negotiations. The president's legal team prepared official demands for financial compensation, not only from the companies but also from the European Union and the United Kingdom, since their laws had allowed such deals to go unnoticed for years. The final report by the Zambian Special Committee was shared in a live broadcast watched by millions. It explained how the minerals had been moved, who had been involved, and how much the country had lost. The report made clear demands: full financial compensation for the stolen resources, strict punishment for the dishonest companies, new trade agreements to protect Africa's resources in the future. When the report was read out, people in homes, schools, and workplaces cheered. Some wept with pride. It was a proud moment for the country, a clear sign that Zambia was standing up for itself. The pressure worked. A week later, the European Union announced it would freeze the bank accounts of the companies involved in the scandal and fine them heavily. The United Kingdom agreed to new trade talks and promised to return some of the stolen money through development projects in Zambia. Though it wasn't the full amount, it was a major victory. In Burkina Faso, things took a different turn. President Traoré tried to hold on to power, but his government weakened as more people spoke against him. A group of respected elders, religious leaders, and military officers asked him to step down to save the country from further unrest. After several days of silence, Traoré announced on national television that he would resign, calling for new leadership to take the country forward. The news was met with mixed feelings. Some were sad to see a leader they once believed in fall so quickly, while others felt relieved. They hoped it would mark the start of honest leadership in Burkina Faso too. Back in Zambia, President Hichilema spoke again to the nation. He thanked the journalists, civil society groups, and ordinary citizens who had bravely demanded the truth. He promised that the country would never again allow its resources to be taken in secret deals. As celebrations filled the streets of Lusaka and other towns, Mavis Fury walked quietly through the crowd. She watched children dance and elderly men clap their hands. She felt proud, not for herself but for her country. It had been a long, difficult journey, but in the end, the truth had won. People sang songs about a new Zambia, one where fairness and honesty would lead the way. Though challenges would surely come in the future, they now believed in the power of unity and courage. And so, as the sun set over the city, the people of Zambia knew they had made history. They had shown the world that even small nations could stand tall and demand what was rightfully theirs. Their voices had been heard and their future was now firmly in their own hands. The days after President Traoré's resignation and the European Union's announcement were filled with new hope across Africa. In Zambia, people still gathered in markets and public parks, speaking about what had happened. But now, the conversations were different. Instead of only expressing anger, people talked about rebuilding and making sure such a thing never happened again. The Zambian government wasted no time. President Hakainde Hichilema called for a national address once again. This time, his message was filled with plans for the future. He spoke calmly but with strength in his voice, promising that the money recovered would not be wasted or lost in new dishonest deals. Our children deserve better schools, he said. Our mothers deserve better hospitals. And our people deserve roads, clean water, and honest leadership. We will not stop here. This is only the beginning of a new Zambia. The crowd outside Parliament cheered. They believed him. And for the first time in years, they felt like their leader was one of them, not above them. A national development fund was created. The government announced that part of the recovered money would go straight into improving services in every province. Health centers that had once struggled without medicine began receiving new supplies. School buildings were repaired, and more teachers were hired. Roads that had been full of potholes for years were finally fixed. The people were not just watching, they were helping. Community leaders in towns and villages formed committees to track how the money was used. They made sure that every project started was finished and that resources reached the people they were meant for. Meanwhile, Mavis Fury and her team at the Lusaka Sentinel continued their work. They promised the people that they would keep a close eye on government actions. Mavis reminded her team that it wasn't just about one big story. It was about protecting the truth every day. Their next reports focused on the changes happening in the country. They visited hospitals where new beds and medicines arrived. They filmed schools where children no longer had to share one book between 5 students. The people smiled into the camera, proud of what they had achieved through unity. Across Africa, other countries took notice of what had happened in Zambia. Leaders in Malawi, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe faced their own citizens demanding investigations into mining deals. Inspired by the bravery of Zambians, people in those countries held peaceful marches and community meetings. They asked their governments to be transparent and fair, to protect the wealth of their people. The African Union, which had mostly stayed silent during the scandal, finally spoke out. In a special summit, African leaders agreed to create stricter rules for trade deals with foreign companies. They promised to work together to stop dishonest business agreements and make sure that African resources benefited African people first. Even in Europe, changes were made. The companies found guilty in Project Equinox were fined, and new laws were passed to prevent secret mineral deals. Though many people knew there was still a long road ahead, it was a small step toward fairness. Months passed, Burkina Faso held new elections. The people chose a leader who promised honesty, fairness, and unity. The country slowly began to rebuild trust between its people and its government. Though the wounds from the scandal were still fresh, there was a quiet belief that things could get better. Back in Lusaka, a large celebration was held to mark 1 year since the exposure of Project Equinox. People filled the streets with songs and dancing. The government organized cultural performances, and school children read poems about honesty and bravery. Even farmers from distant villages traveled to the capital to take part in the event. During The celebrations, President Hichilema praised the journalists, civil society groups, and everyday citizens whose courage had changed the country. He honored Mavis Fury and her team with national medals for bravery and service to the people. When it was Mavis's turn to speak, she stood quietly for a moment, looking out at the large crowd. She thought of the early days when her small newsroom had faced fear and threats, unsure if anyone would believe their story. Then she smiled and said, "This story wasn't about us. It was about the people of Zambia. It showed us what can happen when a nation stands together and demands the truth. Let this be a lesson for all of us. Never be afraid to ask questions and never stop protecting what belongs to the people." The crowd clapped and cheered. It was a moment that would be remembered in history books. In the weeks that followed, more positive changes spread across Zambia. New community centers were built, programs were started to train young people in business and technology, and small farmers were given better tools and support. The country began moving forward, stronger than before, though many challenges still remained: poverty, unemployment, and the need for more development. The people now knew they had the power to hold their leaders accountable. They had learned that no one was too powerful to be questioned, and that together their voices could shape their future. Across Africa, people spoke of the Zambian example. It became a story told to children about how honesty and bravery could defeat greed and dishonesty. It reminded leaders that the wealth of a nation was meant for its people, and that true leadership came from serving others, not oneself. As for Mavis Fury, she continued her work as a journalist. She trained young reporters, teaching them the importance of courage and fairness in telling the truth. The Lusaka Sentinel remained a trusted voice in the country, always watching, always asking, and always protecting the people's right to know. And so, as the sun rose over Lusaka one bright morning, the people of Zambia looked ahead to a new chapter in their story, one where lessons from the past shaped a fairer, brighter, and stronger future. Because they had learned something important: when people stand together, no lie can remain hidden forever, and no wrong is too big to be made right.